All right, so there's a new bill making some serious waves in Washington. And you know what? It could totally change the game for crypto. It's called the Bitcoin Act, and it is easily one of the most ambitious and frankly controversial ideas we've seen in a long, long time. So what's all the buzz about? Let's get into it.
Okay, so first things first, let's answer the big question. What in the world is the Bitcoin Act? Well, at its core, it is a really bold plan. Basically, the bill lays out a whole strategy for the US government to start systematically buying up a ton of Bitcoin over the next 5 years. You can almost think of it like creating a national strategic reserve, but instead of oil or gold, it's Bitcoin.
And look, we are not talking about a small symbolic purchase here. We're not talking chump change. The act calls for buying exactly 1 million Bitcoins. I mean, to put that into perspective for you, that's more Bitcoin than has been mined in the last 2 years combined.
And you know, that 1 million number, it wasn't just pulled out of a hat. It represents about 5% of all the Bitcoin that will ever exist. That's a huge slice of the global pie. If this happens, the US government would become one of the biggest players in the game, like overnight.
And get this might be the most important part. This isn't some quick flip. The government would be required to hold on to this Bitcoin for at least 20 years. That sends a massive signal, right? It says the US is treating Bitcoin not as some speculative asset, but as a long-term strategic reserve, kind of like how it treats gold.
Okay, so you're probably thinking what I'm thinking. 1 million Bitcoin? That's going to cost a staggering amount of money, even over 5 years. So the big question is, who's footing the bill?
Well, the proposal actually has 3 main ways to pay for this. The first one is by far the biggest deal, and then there are 2 smaller streams that would pull from the Federal Reserve's own books.
Now, this first one, this is the real headline grabber. A huge chunk of the U.S. gold reserves is still valued on paper at a price from the 1970s, just over $42 an ounce. If the government just repriced that gold to what it's worth today, we are talking about unlocking over $1 trillion in value without printing a single new dollar bill.
The other 2 funding sources are a little more straightforward. The plan would dip into the Federal Reserve surplus. You can basically think of that as the Fed's savings account, and it would also use some of the interest the Fed earns on all the government debt it holds. So the plan is definitely ambitious, and the funding is, let's call it creative. But let's be real for a second. What are the actual chances of this thing ever becoming law? Let's take a quick look at the political maze it would have to navigate. For the Bitcoin Act to become law, it's got to run an absolute gauntlet. First, it has to get through the Senate Banking Committee, then pass a vote in the full Senate. After that, it has to go over to the House, get through their Financial Services Committee, and only then would it land on the president's desk for a signature.
Yeah, getting any bill through all of that is tough. But something this big, this different, the source material calls it no small feat. And honestly, that feels like a massive understatement. It's a political marathon for sure.
But okay, let's play a game of what if. Let's imagine for a minute that it does pass. Let's ask the billion-dollar or maybe the trillion-dollar question. So what? What would the actual impact be?
To get our heads around that, we're going to walk through a hypothetical scenario that the source material lays out. It's really just a thought experiment to see what the potential financial outcome could be for the government. Okay, so step 1, the investment. Let's just say the government manages to buy that 1 million Bitcoin over 5 years, and the average price they pay is $100,000 a coin. You do the math, that's a $100 billion investment.
All right, now for the fun part, the payoff. Let's imagine that all this government buying and the 20-year lockup helps push the price of a single Bitcoin to $1 million. Wow, that's a 10x return, which turns that initial $100 billion investment into a cool $1 trillion. $1 trillion. I mean, that sounds like an absolutely mind-blowing, nation-changing amount of money, right? For you or me, it would be. But we have to ask, how much is $1 trillion really worth in the grand scheme of the US government's finances? And folks, this is where reality really hits you. That entire $1 trillion profit, a profit they waited 2 decades to realize, you know what it would cover? About 1 single year's worth of interest payments on the US national debt. Just look at the chart. The 2 bars are almost the same height. It's staggering.
And that right there, that's the heart of the political problem. You can see why trying to sell this to Congress as some kind of silver bullet for the nation's debt, well, as the source concludes, it's probably a long shot. The numbers are huge, but the problem is just bigger.
So, what's the takeaway here? The Bitcoin Act is a political long shot, for sure.
And even if it pays off perfectly, it's not going to magically fix the national debt. But it does leave us with a really fascinating question, doesn't it? Is a long-shot bet like this worth the risk when the payoff is measured in trillions? And what would it mean for the rest of us if the U.S. government suddenly became the biggest hodler in the room? Now that is the trillion-dollar question.